Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, my goal here is to finish up with you Module 11. I want you to come prepared for our class on Wednesday, because remember now, tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll be doing a test on Module 1 to 10, and this module, which is Module 11, is not on that. And I'm hoping that what you'll do is you'll come prepared on Wednesday after our test to discuss anything that you see and hear here. There's some controversial stuff in here, the stuff that we should probably dig in on and discuss as a class. Some interesting ideas here. If you remember, last time we were here, we were talking about, when we were in school, we were talking about parenting and what sorts of things have an effect on a child from parenting. If you recall, we were speaking about how adoptive parents often don't have many of the similarities with their adopted offspring as they do with their biological offspring. Not that there's any difference necessarily in their relationship, it's just that there's differences that we see biologically between the parents and the adopted child. And so let me get back to where we were. And so we were talking about some of the things that influence children through parenting. We're talking about attitudes and values, manners, beliefs, faith, and politics, and not specifically of the faith that the person has, but their degree of religiosity, their degree of political involvement, manners and beliefs, etc. I'm going to talk a little bit about temperament and heredity. Temperament refers to a person's stable reactivity, emotional reactivity and intensity. So if, let's say that we're looking at two people who in a given circumstance have the same reaction, let's say, just for argument's sake, it's a negative reaction, and both of them react negatively to about the same intensity, the same degree of being upset, then we would say that they have similar temperament. And particularly if it's consistent across time. If we look at identical twins, those people tend to express similar temperaments, meaning that if one is very intense in the way he or she reacts to a situation, there will be a correlation between the way the twin reacts. Similarly, if a twin is very, very mild and meek and takes an awful lot to get them upset, they're very quiet, chances are there's a correlation with the other twin as well. So it's not that they're both highly reactive and have a reactive temperament. It's just that there's a greater correlation between them. We know that some traits are fixed, having two eyes, two legs, all the rest of it. But we also know that our psychological traits, even though many of them are inherited, clearly have and change with our experience. And so if you kind of look at what we talked about in class, genes kind of provide a range. And that range allows the organism to adapt, in this case a person, to adapt to his surroundings. So if you took, let's say, one twin and you put one twin in a situation where day to day everything was life or death, and their reactivity to a circumstance hinged upon their survival, and the other person was just kind of going up in a very regular, normal environment where, survival from day to day was not critical, it just occurred, then you're going to see a difference in the temperament develop. But yet, if we had switched the twins at birth, theoretically, and put the two in opposite environments, we would see the same thing. They both have a range of acceptable behaviors. It's just that one may be in a position where they have to react and the other one is not. And so we will see a difference in that case because it's self-regulating. If we bring the two of them to the same environment, chances are the temperaments will come back to be the same thing. Genes can influence traits which affect responses, and then that environment can affect the gene activity. We know that certain genes are turned on over a period of time because the person is in a situation that they can't get out of, and it might be, let's say, high expressivity where they're getting very, very upset a lot of time. That may cause neural pathways to open up and respond. The brain responds by making more what am I looking for here? neurotransmitters that would cause that child to react more expressively, more often, and therefore the genes that would have otherwise been turned off in that person's life get turned on, and it's a matter of survival. And so it says here, genetic predisposition that makes a child restless and hyperactive can invoke an angry response from the parents, and that stressful environment can trigger genes to make neurotransmitters that would lead to depression. In some cases, if there was a change in that, and a change in the parent or a change in the child, and that genetic predisposition was gone, that depression might not occur. The gene-environment interaction. If you look at these two people, and we got Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean there on the left, and we've got Orlando Bloom on the right, if you think of how you would react if you were around either one of those people, that's how they view the world. People do not react to Mr. Bean in the same way that they would react to Orlando Bloom, and therefore behaviors that Mr. Bean might show, and obviously being funny and hilarious and a goofball in the presence of others, very likely, is because that's how he looks. And so he has that, he projects it, and therefore people project it toward him, and he gets positive reward by playing that role. Orlando Bloom, I don't know a lot about Orlando Bloom, but I presume that it's because he's an attractive man, and therefore when he grooms himself a certain way and presents himself in a certain way, he's responded to by the people that surround him in a way that makes him feel like I'm doing the right thing, and therefore it tailors him. And he moves more towards being Orlando Bloom, and Rowan Atkinson moves more towards being Rowan Atkinson because of the way that people react to them, and their internal genetic environment is affected by that. Evolutionary psychology is a branch of psychology just like humanism or behaviorism or any of the others. But we talk more about how humans are alike, and more particularly, how human evolution and our evolution of behavior has changed over time because of natural selection. Earlier in the year, I asked you to select a trait that you would want to have in your future spouse, and no one put, unkept, dirty, unclean, socially irresponsible, and those things were just not said. I'd like to have someone who's regularly known for hurting other people, that kind of thing. None of that came out. And the reason simply is because those are not the traits that we tend to value, and we tend not to select for them. Therefore, you could argue that according to human evolutionary psychology, that's why we tend to have less of them, because we've bred them out by not seeking out people who have those negative behaviors, and in fact seeking out those people to be mates who have the positive behaviors that we'd like to see. So natural selection, I think most of you know, it's an evolutionary process through which adaptive traits, that means positive things that help you survive, are passed on to ongoing generations because they help animals survive and reproduce. And therefore incredibly negative traits are often weaned out of our population simply because we don't select those people at a micro level, typically, to reproduce regularly. Let's look at a case of artificial selection, which is kind of new and hit the news. And I'm going to put a second clip up for you to watch after this one, and it actually speaks directly to this. Two biologists, and I'm not going to Trudog it, but I'm not even going to try and pronounce the other person's name. What they did was they took foxes, and for the longest time we believed that foxes could not be tamed. And the reason was, they were wild animals, and if you took a fox kit in, chances are it would never lose that animalistic behavior, and you're just as liable to lose a finger down the road as not. And so what they decided to do was bring foxes in, and they noticed that when they had the foxes in, with very few generations, I believe it was 3 generations, they could actually breed out the aggressivity. And they would actually have a fox that when you entered the pen would wag its tail and come over to you and want to be petted and roll over and let you pet its belly and all the rest of it. And that the foxes had been domesticated And the way that they did it was simple. They just simply looked at the group of foxes that they had, and they took the mildest, meekest, approachable ones and bred those together. And then from that offspring bred those together. And therefore genetically removed the highly aggressive nature traits by simply saying, okay, maybe now in this environment, if you could equate it to a natural environment, we'll select for the creatures where being good and kind and approachable is in fact a favorable trait, and see if the rough disposition or the aggressive disposition disappears. And in fact it did. And I'll put a link down below. Just take a peek at it. It's quite amusing, and you'll get an idea of these foxes. Interesting too, I have read that the biological traits are affected by hormones they have in their bloodstream, and with a reduction in the aggressive hormones, there's actually a change in fur color too. Quite interesting. We know that a number of human traits are affected by selection pressure, and we notice them a lot in children. For instance, what's kind of interesting is children don't typically fear strangers until they're able to be mobile themselves. And very often, if you think about it from an evolutionary point of view, a mother or a father may have a child and have to pass it to someone that the child's not familiar to. And in the case where the child's not able to stand on their own or move on their own, the child just simply has to assume, well, this is a positive thing because my parent is handing me to this other person, and therefore there's nothing to fear. But once children become mobile themselves, that stranger fear kicks into place, and they tend to hide behind mom or dad's legs or grip tightly to them, because at this point in time would be the time when they would theoretically have the choice of who they go to, and of course they choose to go to mom and dad. Evolutionarily, that would be the smart thing to do, as opposed to being as open with strangers as they would be with mom and dad. If I asked you in the room how many people fear, electricity or guns versus spiders or snakes, I'm going to get more hands up on the spiders and snakes, even though electricity and guns kills a lot more people than do spiders and snakes. We as a species tend to have a condition, if you will, to becoming afraid of spiders and snakes more easily than electricity and guns. And evolutionary psychologists would suggest that is because in our evolutionary past, having a healthy fear of spiders or having a healthy fear of snakes is in fact adaptive and keeps us safe. We'll look here now too about how men and women are alike, and we have way more alike traits than we do differs. But we also do know that one of the areas in which men and women differ is their sexuality, and we'll talk here about that in a minute. We look at human sexuality and the gender differences in it. Males and females, to a large extent, behave and think very similarly. Differences arrive, however, in reproductive behavior. So if we look, and this is 3 abbreviated questions, if we look at, do you partake in or are you agreeable to, what we would refer to as a casual sexual relationship? In males, 58% respond yes. Females, 34%. It's a marked difference. If you have sex, do you have sex as a form of affection? With males, only 25% say yes, yet almost 50% of women will say yes. It's a form of affection. Thinking about sex every day, over 50% of males, 54% of males says yes, thinking about sex every day. In the case of females, only 20%. So if you have something like that, where the differences are rather marked, our question then from an evolutionary psychology point of view would be, why is there such a difference? If you look at it strictly from natural selection, now here is where, a lot of people would argue with this because there's not a lot of moral value in this. They're just saying strictly from a natural selection point of view. Natural selection would have caused males to send their genes in the future by mating with multiple females. So if you look at it clearly just from what we call an opportunistic attempt at mating, the male preferred, or the way that a male would be most successful in passing his genes on to the future would be to have multiple female partners. And the reasoning simply behind that is what we call, it's not written here, the PIT, the parental investment theory. Basically, if a male has sex with a female and she becomes pregnant, he could theoretically simply walk away from the situation and his genes have been carried on. She may well raise that child and she may bring it up into the world, and therefore genetically and only from the position of natural selection, his job is done, and he has been successful in that. Whereas from a female point of view, we tend to see females seeking out one mature, caring male. And again, only from the evolutionary psychology point of view, from natural selection, and that the reason they would do that is because there are higher costs involved with pregnancy and nursing. And when we say higher costs, I'm not necessarily talking monetary. During the period of time when she is pregnant, she may not be able to hunt and gather, or in our case, work. During the nursing period of time, there'll be a time where she's delayed and unable to go out and get foodstuffs and all the rest of it, and it's at that time that she wants to be attached to that one maturing, caring male in order to assist her through those times. And that wouldn't just be equated to today, that would be equated throughout our evolutionary past. Those two differences would equate as to why we see those gender differences. I'm going the wrong way, I'll just pop back here. Why we might see those numbers. The two sexes may be looking for two different things. Mating preferences, if we look generally, males look for youthful appearing females in order to pass their genes into the future. If you look at cosmetics and so on and so forth, they tend to be marketed largely to female. I know there's a growing male interest in it, but we tend to see globally that females tend to be more marketed to. And so if we look at a man and a woman getting together and becoming interested in one another, and we're saying, who's the one that's wearing makeup, or who's the one that's preparing themselves visually more so for that encounter, we tend to see almost exclusively, very much so, that it tends to lie more toward the female. That is because the male, from an evolutionary point of view, is looking for that youthful appearing female, and theoretically it is because that youthful appearing female would be more likely to be successful in rearing children. In his conscious mind, you could argue that would be the last thing on his mind. He might say, oh, she's attractive, or she's this, or she's that, without taking it down to, well, I think she'll be capable of making a lot of babies. He's likely judging her attractiveness, but yet from an evolutionary point of view, that attractiveness tends to also be the same signals for reproductive health. Females, on the other hand, are looking for maturity and dominance and affluence, boldness in males. Those are the types of traits that, again, if we go back to that slide, tend to sort of play themselves toward men being able to be caring and provide. They want them to be dominant and mature, so they're not running around and doing the things that in a monogamous relationship that they, quote, shouldn't. Affluent, meaning having the resources to get them through those times. And again, that's probably the last thing on her mind, yet if she's saying, no, I like him, he's this, he's that, he's mature, he's a nice guy, those also equate to those same characteristics of being, able to assist and care for me during those periods of time. The other 2-3 slides we'll just go over in class. I'll stop it here. If you look at, let's say, dating practices, I've heard it equated to say that if you look at the lies that are told on dates, and I'm not talking verbal lies here, you could argue that in the female case, she may be wearing makeup and doing her hair a certain way to appear more youthful and to appear more attractive. And that tends to be more of a preoccupation with the female than it does with the male in preparing for that. You could say that there's a genetic lie being said that I am more youthful and therefore more able to bear children. Again, that's the last thing necessarily on his or her mind. In the same respect, he's much more likely to lie about his job, his future, his car, the friends that he hangs around with, the clubs that he can get into, his ability to be affluent and dominant. Those are the sorts of lies that he's apt to tell. So he's more apt to tell lies, let's say, orally, and she may be doing much more so visually. It's an interesting debate, an interesting discussion. I hope we get the chance to have it in class. All right, I'm going to end this here, and I'm going to pop up that video of the fox underneath this one. Study well for your test. If you have any questions, you can post them up in Edmodo, and I'll check it a couple times through the day. Have a good day. Talk to you later. Bye.